Welcome to the Speckled Truth podcast. This is the only show dedicated to the conservation of the trophy trout population from the East Coast to the Gulf Coast. Here, we go below the surface to discuss what happens when science and anglers work together for a cause. Gear up with your host, Captain Chris Bush, a trophy trout purist, leader and educator within the fishing community, as he talks about all things big speckled trout. Get ready for the slimy, salty truth, better known as the Speckled Truth.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Speckled Truth podcast. I'm not going to lie, I've been looking forward to this episode for an extremely long time. Today's guest is incredibly unique. Doc Jay Wright is a 3-time IGFA World Record holder in various line classes for speckled trout on fly. In addition to his world records, he's competed and won against some of the best fishermen along the Texas coast, which we'll discuss here in a bit. But simply put, Doc is very good at targeting and catching world-class fish. Aside from that, though, he's an incredibly humble person and loves to share his passion. So, Doc, welcome to the show.
Hey, man. Thanks, Chris. I'll tell you, I'm just really honored to be doing this podcast and appreciate you having me.
Absolutely, Doc. I'm humbled. To simply put, I know we've met and we fished a little bit over there in Florida when I lived there, which was an incredible experience for me. And so the fact is that we've continued to kind of foster that relationship and have it over the course of time, share some thoughts, share some things through kind of what we see in terms of our own pursuit for targeting certain fish in various estuaries. It's been really, really just, again, humbling to call you friend, but not only that, to kind of pick your brain and have you as a resource as part of kind of my endeavor. So, but I don't want to kind of take away anything there. I want to actually welcome you to the show, and I want you to tell folks a little bit about yourself.
Well, I grew up in the Tampa Bay area and moved to Texas to get my undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering at Southern Methodist University, which is in Dallas. I spent another 8 years in Texas getting my medical degree. And now I reside in Windermere, Florida, with my beautiful wife and 4 amazing daughters. And I have been a pain management physician for the past 18 years. And I just really enjoy getting out and chasing big trout as much as I can.
Absolutely. And so so in Dallas, you were at Southern Methodist, excuse me. I watched them play last night actually against Memphis.
Yeah, it didn't
Sorry
turn
about
out
that.
so well.
I know.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
sorry, Doc. But after
No,
that, so in the Dallas area, did you move and do like a residency along the coast, or were you close to the
yes, I
coast? Because there
did.
was some correlation there.
Absolutely. I moved from Dallas to Houston, and that's where I
Okay.
did my medical school. And of course, that was only about an hour from Galveston Bay, which is where
hmm
I started fishing a lot when I was there.
So when you were in Tampa Bay, growing up there, I mean, did you target trout at all?
I did, and it was my late grandfather that introduced me to trout fishing while growing up there. And what was interesting is that he was actually a trout specialist himself,
No
and
kidding.
yeah, and so he's the one that really kind of passed that passion, for catching trout on to me.
Do you remember catching your first trout with him?
My first one with him, no, I can't remember that.
Does a
Uh,
certain trip stand out to you that you guys had together?
Well, there is one trip, and it's a moment I'll probably never forget. I was probably about 12, or I'm sorry, about 10 years old at the time, and I witnessed my grandfather land an 8-pound sea trout that he caught on one of those old salty dog shrimp imitations, soft plastics, like a yellow shrimp tail.
Uh-huh.
And I'll tell you, I just remember, trying to net it and I couldn't get it in the net and he's screaming at me. But eventually, we got this fish in the net and I just couldn't believe, its massive size and then just how
hmm
beautiful it was. And, now some 40 years later, I still get that same excitement, when I'm pursuing these challenging fish.
And that's the crazy part about it, because to think, and we'll, so let's not even belabor that point. Let's talk about it. So give folks an idea of the 3 IGFA world records that you have. What are they?
Okay, well, the 3 that I have are, my first one was also my biggest one, but that was the 12-pound tippet world record. And I caught an 11-pound, 8-ounce trout, 11 and a half
Good
pounds.
God.
And my second record, which was the 20-pound tippet world record, was actually a small fish, but that's all it took to beat the previous record.
Mm-hmm.
And that fish was 8 pounds, 12 ounces, so 8 3/4.
Okay.
And then the third record that I recently obtained was the 2-pound tippet world record, and that was a 9-pound fish that I caught on 2-pound tippet.
Absolutely unreal. And so to think, and the reason I asked you to do that was because when you were 10 years old, netting a fish for your grandfather, 8.5-pound fish, understanding the joy and excitement, and then still having the same zeal to
Yeah.
target those fish, and then still like, oh my God, it's an 11.5-pound fish. But Doc, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, you've probably caught hundreds of incredibly large fish that we would just die to catch one, right? And so it's amazing, and we'll talk more about that, especially with regards to your pursuit and your approach and all that. But throughout the course of your time, was there a particular instance when you were like, you know what, I'm gonna really just kind of target world-class fish?
Yeah, well, I don't really remember, I guess, a particular time, but I do remember an experience. Well, more of the article that I read. It was about the current IGFA all tackle world record sea trout that was caught by Craig Carson in 1995.
The
And
17.7.
exactly. And after I read that, I mean, I just became obsessed with, wanting to try to fish an area that could produce a 17-pound trout. And this thing was 39 and a half inches long. I mean, just unreal. And so because of that, me and my good friend and my former tournament partner in Texas, David Friedel, we
Mm-hmm.
decided to pull my boat from Houston, all the way to Fort Pierce, Florida, where that fish was caught. And the bottom line was that we just had an incredible trip. And by the end of it, we had both caught our personal best trout. And David actually caught a 10.5-pound fish, just a monster. So needless to say, I mean, we were really impressed. And I just felt that, we had only really scratched the surface of what that area had to offer.
Mm-hmm.
So after that trip, I knew that I wanted to move back to Florida because I just felt that particular estuary, and I'm talking about the lower Indian River Lagoon on the east coast of Florida. I just
Mm-hmm.
felt like that gave me my best chance of catching a truly giant sea trout. And so that's when my pursuit for these line class world records began. And well, go ahead.
I was going to ask you, I mean, have you always been a fly guy, or is it
No,
something that you've kind of matured into?
not at all. In fact, it was not being able to catch a conventional tackle world record that moved me to fly fishing,
Hmm.
because all of the fly fishing world records were much smaller fish and they were much more obtainable. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there were fish that were only 8 pounds, like the 20-pound tippet world record I caught. So that's what really pushed me um, into becoming a fly fisherman. And
Interesting.
I joined a local fly fishing club. And they actually, it's kind of funny because they knew I caught big trout all the time, and they actually invited me to their club to do a presentation. And so I did a presentation on catching trophy sea trout, and then
Hmm.
after that, just learned how to fly cast, and now it's really what I love to do. I mean, I will fish with conventional tackle, but fly fishing is just my passion.
Sure. Now, when you were on the Texas coast, you were not fly fishing. Is that correct?
Not at all. No,
And
I
so,
never fly
how did you
fished.
get into the tournament scene during that time? Because I know through Mike and Jay and through Conversation Rousey, all of those guys talk about you and how you're really held in high regard and tremendous esteem that you have across not only these tremendous anglers, but across the Texas coast in general. And so
Wow. Well,
I'm
I
interested in
didn't
kind
realize
of,
that, but
no,
that's pretty
well,
cool.
I'm telling you now, you are. And so, but no, so tell me though, so you got into tournament fishing or was that something you just decided to do? And talk to me about that before you've transitioned into fly fishing for world class fish.
Well, when I went to medical school, we bought a house in Houston, and it just happened that the guy that lived across the street from me was this sea trout fisherman, and that was David Friedel. And
That's
he
funny.
ended up being my tournament partner. And I fished for several years when I was in medical school, but not in
Hmm.
tournaments or anything like that. Um, but we started fishing together a lot and just became really best friends. And through our fishing, uh, we realized that well, we're pretty good anglers, and we decided to try out in a fishing tournament. And I remember the first tournament that we fished. It was a GCCA. It was actually called GCCA back then.
Hmm. Yeah.
Tournament, and we were fortunate enough to win that event. And so we just kind of got the bug after that.
Hmm.
We started fishing the old Gulf Coast Trout Masters tournament
Uh-huh.
series, and once again, we did very well. So uh, you, you know, well, go ahead.
No, and I know from talking with Mike and Jay, I think that's how both of them know you and know of you. And it's funny, the term trout master, at least when I talked to Mike about it, is that to earn the title trout master, you actually physically had to win like an actual trout master event. And so what have you won multiple or how many did you win at that time?
Yeah, it's very fortunate. As I said, I won three tournaments.
Good gosh.
Two of them.
And this is stiff competition. It's crazy. Anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, two of them were in Galveston, which was basically, that was my home waters. But I
Right.
never really fished in too many of the other estuaries in Texas.
Mm.
But yeah, I won three. Won a couple boats, which was pretty cool. That was awesome. Uh,
Yeah.
and I also fished with my another really good friend actually that I met through Trout Masters is Dr. John Gill. And both David
Okay.
and
Yeah.
I, became really good friends with him, and now we fish a lot together still. I mean, they come over here to
Mhm.
Florida to fish, and I go over to Texas and fish with them. And John's just an exceptional angler. In fact, I would say that he's probably the best big sea trout angler that I know personally.
Hmm.
Um, but anyway, me and him, after I moved to Florida, he invited me back to Texas to fish one of the Baffin Bay bashes,
Mhm.
and again we were lucky and won that tournament. So
Wow.
it's a lot of fun.
That's amazing. So you fished there and then you transitioned back to Florida. What time frame was this?
I moved back to Florida in 2001.
2001.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you registered your first world record when?
The first fish that I caught was in 2007.
Okay. Okay. Out of the 3, Jay, which one do you hold in higher regard? Like which one is like that one is if out of the 3, this one's it. This one took so much whatever.
Well, I'd have to say it was definitely the 2 pound tippet world record.
Uh-huh.
That was a
Why is
9-pound
that?
fish. And well, if I guess for anyone who's ever even attempted to fish with a true 2-pound test line, you'd understand why. But if you haven't, it's just amazing. It took me a really long time just to get used to fly casting with it without breaking it. I mean,
Oh my
if
God.
if you were too aggressive on your cast, you would actually just break the fly off, in midair.
Oh my
And it also
gosh.
took me a really long time just to learn how to fight fish. And when I say fight, I mean that's a term used really loosely because you're not fighting these fish on 2-pound tippet. You can't even set the hook on 2-pound tippet. You just have to kind of get some tension on it. Once you see the fish eat the fly, you just put a little slight tension on it and hope that it doesn't break. And then you just have to let the fish do whatever she wants. And eventually, they will tire out just by dragging your fly line all over the place.
Hmm.
But it's exceedingly hard. I mean, I broke off so many fish, trying to master that 2-pound tippet, and that's why I think that I hold that fish in such high regard. Um,
Hmm.
there just was no margin for error basically, and somehow all the stars aligned, and I was able to catch that fish. But there's also a couple other things um, that happened, and that made this even more of a special fish. And I don't know if you remember, but you were actually somewhat involved in one of them. And so, we had just fished together for the first time in the
Hmm.
northern Mosquito Lagoon, like you were alluding to earlier. Um, and that was the spring of 2018. And
Yes.
unfortunately, that was like the worst spring of fishing for big sea trout that I've really ever experienced since I moved to Florida in 2001. Um, and that was because the Mosquito Lagoon had started to deteriorate after all the algae blooms and massive loss of seagrass.
Yeah.
Um, but still, when you came on that trip, I was optimistic about our chances to catch a big fish because I'd located some pretty solid trout in the same
Hmm.
area that we fished about a week before, and there was grass
Well,
in that area, and so I thought we might have some good success. But you know how it is. um,
oh yeah.
I had just met
Well,
you, and I'm trying to make this this good first impression on you. And
uh,
most of the fish that were there just moved on, and I remember we had trouble finding others. But anyway, we decided to call it quits, and relatively, um, well, we called it quits, and then I was on my way home, and I thought, you know what? There's still a little bit of daylight left, so I went down to the southern end of the Mosquito Lagoon just to see what that looked like. And sure enough, I was able to find an area holding some big trout. And those trout were also near some of the last remaining grass. Um,
mhm.
so that area that I found that day or that evening after we had left turned out that was the exact same spot that I caught that 2-pound record. And so what was amazing to me about that whole situation looking back is that had I gone home and had I never checked out that area that day, I don't think I would have
Mhm.
ever caught that world record fish. So that was one
Y
of the things that occurred. And the second thing that occurred was that I found a flaw in my tackle just a few weeks before I caught that 9-pound fish. And
Mhm.
and yeah, what had happened is I'd been using this Andy tournament line, and they make line that's IGFA certified, and it shouldn't break over the rated strength. But this spool of 2-pound test line that I had was about 15 years old. And so I started to
Mm.
wonder, is this line losing some strength? I mean, is it breaking at its full potential? So I decided to test it, and I was pretty shocked to find out I was only breaking at 1.5 pounds. So
Hmm.
I'm losing like 7 or
Yeah.
7/10 of a pound breaking strength. So I ended up getting on the internet, ordering several spools of different 2-pound rated lines, and I started to test those. Um, and then I found one of those lines in particular that consistently broke at just over 2 pounds. And since the IGFA tests all their lines using the metric system, that's acceptable because 1 kilogram, which would be the 2-pound tippet record, is actually 2.2 pounds. So as long as it broke under 2.2 pounds, it was good. So at that point, I'm thinking this is a potential game changer. I mean, I've just increased the strength of my line by almost 50%. And I was so excited about that discovery that I told my wife, I'm going to catch a world record with this new line. And she's like, yeah, whatever. But it was just so funny that, a week later, it was literally a
It,
week later, I
hmm
caught that fish. But
it,
but once again, if I hadn't discovered that old 2 pound line was breaking it a pound and a half, I would have never caught it. So a couple interesting things happened. I thought that made that happen.
and I remember you texting me that week later
Yes.
because when we were
That's
talking on
right.
the boat, when we were talking on the boat, so we first off, it was a phenomenal trip because I got a chance to fish with you.
Oh,
I did
thanks.
break off a really good fish. Remember that
Yes,
first
I
thing?
do.
We yes, I
I didn't
know.
wanna
That's
talk
on
about
me.
that one.
No, I'll talk
I'm
about it,
kidding.
dude. I'm a flawed fisherman, absolutely, 100%. I
We
have
all are. We
no,
all are.
you're right. Yeah. Anyway, so but great time, great time. It was amazing. So, but when you texted me, you're like, I broke it, and I remember talking about it on your boat, and I said, Jay, I kind of asked a similar question. What are you after? Like, what's your next goal? And that was like, I want to break the 2 pound. And you were kind of talking about it. And I remember your excitement. You're like, oh my God. And so you were talking about the process and submission and this, that, and the other thing. And so sure enough, as it turns out, obviously it's certified now as a 2 pound IGFA World Record. So let me transition to that because that's a great segue into kind of the IGFA submission process. To me, and I know we've talked a little bit about it, but for a lot of the folks that are listening out there, this is probably incredibly foreign to them. The IGFA World Record submission process. What is that? I mean, like, what is that like? Does it sound something as simple like if I was going fishing, I'm using 20-pound Seagar Senshi and I catch let's say a 15-pound fish. Do I just bring it in? And so uh,
Right.
there's got to be more to that. You're talking about testing break strength and this, that, and the other thing. Like, talk us through your process or the IGFA submission
Yeah,
process.
there's a lot more to that. So, and just using your example real quickly, if you're using most lines you buy off the shelf, they're not going to break at the strength that they're rated on the carton or on the package. Um, so you're probably not going to be eligible for any line classes, especially if you were using 20 pound, because that's the maximum line class that they have.
Interesting.
Now you could be eligible for an all tackle world record though, because that's just the biggest fish of any species, and it can be caught on any kind of tackle, fly rod, bait casting, spinning,
Sure.
whatever, and on any class line. I think up to 130 pounds. So I don't think you have to worry about
So
that.
Craig, so Craig Carson's record, if you caught it on whatever tackle, whatever line, whatever lure, if it was 17.8, you'd own the current world record.
That is correct. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So, um, one thing, well, there are several ways that you can qualify a catch for a world record. There's the all tackle world record that we just spoke about,
hmm
and then there are the IGFA line class records, and those are the ones that I'm pursuing because I highly doubt I'll ever catch a 17-pound trout. But again, with the fly rod, these records are obtainable, and so the IGFA line class records include a 2-pound tippet world record, 4-pound tippet world record, a 6-pound tippet world record, 8-pound, 12-pound, 16-pound, and 20-pound. Those are the classes that
hmm
you're allowed to submit fish under. And so obviously, in order to break one of those, you need to catch the biggest fish on that particular line. And the IGFA does require that, you send it in and test it. So it has to test below that line strength. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and just
So,
go ahead.
so if you caught a fish, like let's say you caught a 9 pound, right? When you caught the nine
Hmm.
pound, did you have to submit the fly, submit a set amount of actual tippet or line or leader or
You
whatever?
do.
Okay.
For any well, for a fly class record, you have to submit the entire leader, which is basically from the fly line. Then your leader all the way
Hmm.
down to the fly itself. So yes, you do have to submit that, and you have to do a lot of other things too. Um,
Hmm.
if you go through the process, I mean, the first thing you need to do is you need to weigh the fish. So you need to be prepared for that. Um, I keep a certified.
So,
Well, go ahead.
I was going to ask you, so how does that look for you? Like, would it talk about your process?
So my process is
So do you have like a certified scale and all that
yes,
stuff?
absolutely. I have a certified Boga grip scale, and the uh, the Boga grip. Has to be certified. But if you don't have it certified, like say you caught a record and you didn't have a scale that was certified, you can send it in later and get it certified through the IGFA. But to
Okay.
be on the safe side, I just send mine in and get it certified every year, and the certification's good for a year. So that way I can take that out of the equation. I don't have to worry that my scale is not going to be certified. The only other
Okay.
equipment though that you really need is like some type of flexible tape measure, like a seamstress tape or something like that, and you need a
Okay.
camera because what you need to do is if you caught a world record, you need to get the weight of the fish, of course, and you one of the things is you have to be on the ground or standing in the water when you get that official weight. You can't weigh it on a boat. So that's one of the most
Hmm.
important things. Um, because you could lose a world record if you just weighed it on the boat. Uh,
Why is that, Jay?
I don't know for sure, but I suspect it's because, if you're out on the rough seas and the boat is bouncing around and the scales bouncing up and down,
That makes
you
sense.
probably couldn't get an accurate measurement. I think it's more for offshore guys than it is for people
Got it.
like us who fish inshore. Um, yeah.
That makes sense.
So you need some measurements. You have to measure the girth of the fish, and you have to measure the length of the fish. And then there are also some pictures that you need to have. You need a photo
Mhm.
of the fish laying on its side, and they prefer that it be on some type of measuring device so that they can confirm how long it was, even though that's not an IGFA requirement, but it gives them an idea if if the weight is kind of jiving with the length. You
Mhm.
need a photo of the angler with the fish. You need a photo of the scale that you used, and you need a photo of the rod and reel that you used. And of course, if you're out on the water trying to do all this stuff, you don't necessarily have to take pictures of your rod and reel and your scale while
Okay.
you're out there. Um, so if you're prepared for all this, you can do these things really quickly, and that's important to me because I never wanted to kill any of the records that I caught. So I always tried to be prepared. And I'm proud to say that of all those records, all three of the records that I caught, they were all released in good condition, and I'm pretty sure
That
they survived.
that is awesome. That that's amazing. So Doc, I mean, about how long does this submission process take?
Well, for my records, it took anywhere from 3 to 6 months from the time I sent the application in until they were approved.
Okay. So it's a pretty lengthy process.
It
So
is.
from the time you caught it, what back in that was in what May
Well, I caught
of
well, you're talking about the 2 pound tippet I caught
yeah.
in in March 18th.
March
I'm
of
sorry,
18.
March
That's right.
24th, not March. March 24th of 2018.
Okay. And so when did that actually get certified? That was a pretty long time.
Yeah, I don't remember the specific day. I just remember it was 6 months
Yeah.
afterward.
Is there like once it's actually certified, do they send you something?
They do. I mean, you get a certificate, and then obviously your name is goes into their database of records, and they print out a book every year of all the records. But it's also easy to access it, online. And I don't think that if you're not a member of IGFA, I don't think you can access all the records. But if you are, it's pretty interesting because you can go in there. Like I could go in and I can look at the records that preceded mine. I mean, they even give you the history of which records were there and which ones were broke. So there's a lot of good information in there.
Yeah. Is there any like sort of financial reward or some sort of like financial compensation if you break a world record or hold a world record? Is there like an annual, you know, dollar amount that they would give you, or is this just kind of notoriety?
No, there is absolutely, you know,
No,
no.
I have no
Yeah,
idea. You know what I'm
no,
saying?
there's
It's like
there's no
it'd be.
financial reward. In fact, the application itself, if you're not an IGFA member, costs $100
Oh
to just
wow! So you
apply.
have to be in. Okay,
If you're if you
got it. Because before everybody go, yeah, before everybody out there listening starts to go, man, I'm gonna go catch a world class fish. There is no financial reward. So other than obviously respect and notoriety, which you definitely
Well, and
have.
I'm not
So,
even looking
uh,
for that. I mean, it's just for
no, I know.
my satisfaction, to be honest.
Sure, of course.
Um,
Yeah. So would you be, that's a good that's a great thought process because I mean, would you be upset if someone actually did break one of your records?
well, I think that would depend on who broke it. And what I mean by that is if someone like you or myself, who's got a true passion for catching big sea trout, breaks one of my
Yeah.
records, well, I would totally respect that, and I'd be happy for them. But if
Yeah.
someone who really didn't care about sea trout one bit was just fly fishing
Yeah.
for redfish or something, and for whatever reason they had tippet that was IGFA legal, and a giant trout just happened to appear, right in front of them, and was
Yeah.
in a feeding mode and vulnerable being caught, and they end up catching it by just blind luck. Well, that would probably be a little harder for me to swallow, but in the end, I don't think I'd be that upset. There's other records, so I could go after those.
Yeah. So so speaking of which, I mean, you got 3. I mean, what is the next goal? What's the next pursuit?
Um, well, the next goal is to get the 20-pound tippet world record, and we haven't talked about this, and I think I mentioned this, before the podcast, but something we
Mhm.
haven't talked about is or that ties in, with that goal is that as of May of this year, and so just recently, the IGFA implemented this new minimum weight requirement for all of the line class world records. And what they decided um, is that for a fish to qualify for a world record, it had to weigh at least half as much as the line class that it was caught on. So, for example, if you were
Okay.
using 20-pound test line, then you would have to catch at least a 10-pound fish to qualify it as a record. And so,
So
oh, go ahead.
that's the pursuit right now is a 10-pound fish
It
on
is
20
because
pound.
now my 20-pound record, that had existed, since 2012, is now basically, vacant. It's gone. So it's not recognized as
Mhm.
a record any longer.
Hey everyone, I'd like to take a small break to sincerely thank our podcast sponsors. As you know, we're a brand about sharing the passion and pursuit of trophy speckled trout, as well as our conservation. Fortunately for us, Mirror, Texas Custom Lures, and the original Custom Corky support that same passion, which is evident through the support of this podcast. Simply put, without these brands, none of this would be possible. and we're incredibly appreciative, and we hope you are too. Now, let's get back to the discussion. Growing up in the Tampa area, and kind of recapping, I'm recapping for my own brain here because understanding the levity of kind of who and what I'm talking about. But so growing up in the Tampa area, really kind of growing up, seeing big fish at a young age and kind of seeing the passion and now embracing and having this passion throughout kind of your youth to adulthood to then shaping you to then, okay, hey, I want to start targeting these fish. And so now you go out and do it. You go out and you catch, the 3 IGFA World Records. And so now I want to talk about, I'm sure probably some folks would want to even talk about, like, how did you, like, what is the process of trying to find literally world-class fish? Like, is there something you do that's specific to you and your
Well,
approach for targeting
yeah. I mean, I can
these
tell
big
you what
fish?
I do. um, yeah,
Yeah, no, and this is a podcast talking to you.
absolutely.
I want to hear
Okay.
this. I want to hear
Well,
this.
first of all, I
Yeah.
mean, one of the things that I strongly believe is that successful fishing is about putting as many factors that you can control in your favor. And since, I have a full time job and I can't be on the water as much as I'd like, so I had to try to figure out some way, to make the best use of the limited fishing time that I have out on the water. Um, and this meant, just trying to figure out when I had the best chance of catching a world
Mhm.
record trout.
So time of month, maybe time of
Exactly.
year.
Yeah, so I started collecting that kind of data. I started collecting and analyzing that kind of data
Mhm.
from as many sources that I could find, as far as when these big fish were caught. And so, I always kept a fishing log. Since 2001, I kept a pretty detailed fishing log. So I used that data. I looked at documented trophy trout that were caught by friends of mine. So I had
Mhm.
that data to go by. I looked at the current and previous IGFA world records. So I had that. I looked at, there are various books. I don't know if you've ever heard, there was a book that Scott Murray published.
Oh god, yeah.
Yeah.
Texas trophy trout for
Exactly. So
tomorrow.
there's a
Yeah.
there's a lot of information in there. If you go through those catches, those extraordinary catches, you have the dates on most of them. You can look
Mhm.
at things like the what the moon phase was and that kind of thing. And then most recently, I've just been blessed that you're giving me the opportunity to look through some of the data that you're getting from the
Mhm.
Dirty 30 program. And
Yeah,
so,
and
well, go ahead.
no, and I've seen you always like it, right? And I'm like, knowing that, okay, I know I don't have to share anything with you. I know you're capturing your own kind of data points. And so what are things that you're capturing? So I'm capturing obviously the person, where they live, kind of where they caught it, date it was caught, what they caught it on, and whether the fish was released. What else are you getting?
Well, in my logs, I mean, it's basically the same thing that you just said. I mean, I do all
Mhm.
those, and in the beginning, I track just about everything, and I still do, and I'm not sure of the significance of it because some of it, they're just hard to to get trends from. But obviously, the date that the fish was caught, the weight of the fish. Um,
The
I'm looking at water temperatures, um, barometric pressure, tides, water levels, amount of bait that was present. I'm trying to think of all the things that I'm doing. I'm sure I'm leaving some of that wind direction, wind
what about
velocity.
like moon phase and all that stuff?
Absolutely. And that's the things that really matter. And when I started analyzing all this data, and in particular, fish that were 10 pound and larger, I started seeing these trends. Um, and so it became apparent that the time of year, and these are things that you have on your Dirty 30 list, the moon phases. and one thing you don't have there is salooner periods, and I think
Hmm.
that's critical too. But I discovered that all of those things really play a big role in catching world record fish. So having said that, I don't know if you want to review this, but I did prepare some of that data, and I don't know if your listeners would be interested, but I would imagine they probably would. And what kind of stuff I found.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Maybe actually no. I mean, maybe what we can do is, we can obviously talk outside the podcast
Oh, no, I'm
episode, and we
fine with
can.
presenting this, and in fact, I kind of want
Yeah.
to because it just shows, some of the things that I think. Well, I know you think like I do too, as far as these moon phases and lunar periods. But just for an example, for the listeners, because I think they'll appreciate this. Um,
Okay.
the data, for 10-pound and over fish shows that most of those fish were caught in the month of March. So just thinking about time of year right now, most of those
Okay.
10-pound and over fish of that whole list that I have were caught in March. And then February was the second most productive month. May was the third, and January was the fourth. But in general, the bulk of all these big fish are caught, sometime in the spring.
Hmm.
Um, and that's those are numbers that support a theory that I've had for a long time, and that is that bigger trout start spawning earlier than smaller ones, and consequently, there's a larger concentration of bigger fish on the flats in the early spring, where someone with the fly rod can catch them, or even conventional tackle as well. And there was actually a
Hmm.
study to kind of back this up. It was performed by McMichael and Peter in 1989 that concluded that older trout become reproductively active earlier in the season. So, obviously the older ones should be bigger. That's not always the case, but it just kind of backs that up. Um,
Hmm.
and I just think there's a big advantage to targeting these fish early in the spring. And one of the other things associated with that early spawning activity is that prior to spawning, a female's ovaries, get hydrated, and that can account for up to a 10% increase in their weight. So obviously, that makes a big difference for me when I'm pursuing world records. So that's as far as time of year. If I had to pick, my favorite month to fish, I'd probably pick March, just because statistically that looks like when most of the big fish are caught. And then going on to moon phases, um, the data for the moon phases shows that 33% of trout over 10 pounds are caught around the full moon, and 30% around the new moon. And
Interesting.
yeah, so that's pretty significant because when you compare that to the first quarter moon, which was only 19% were caught around the first quarter and 18% around the last quarter, it does show that it seems like there's more big trout, or really big trout over 10 pounds, caught around the new and full moons. So that just tells me that my odds of catching a big trout are going to be better, obviously, fishing around those. And what's really cool is if you look at that even closer, of all those fish caught around the full moon, 83% were caught before the full moon. And I remember you saying something about your dad really liking fishing, I think a week before the full moon. Well,
Yep.
this shows that there's a lot of data to back up what he already knows. He probably didn't even need to do any kind of analysis, but it's just pretty cool that the percentage is that high. So if you are going to fish around a full moon, you definitely want to be fishing before it.
Before.
Absolutely.
So that all this is interesting, and here's why. Because so first off, listening to your own data that you're collecting from a myriad of sources, kind of like what we're doing with 3030 and the trophy trout citation, which is we're collecting again from a myriad of sources. Our listeners, our followers, from Virginia to obviously to South Texas, and so with let me rephrase that. with all these data points from across these estuaries funneling into a certain area, you can start to kind of see some of these trends. I've shared some of these on Speckled Truth, especially with regards to kind of lure technique by season. I love that one because it definitely shows, I think, a correlation with the fish and how they change and adapt their eating approach based off of maybe bait availability in the actual fishery. But the other one that's really, so it's really that. And then the other one's obviously moon phase. And so between, I talked about this as well, the 12 days, so plus or minus the 3 days before and after a new moon, excuse me, and 3 days before and after a full moon, we're seeing it's of those 12 days, there's like 58% of the fish that are registered come in those 12 days, right?
Yeah.
I'm not a very good
I mean,
mathematician, but the remaining come from the other, uh, days of the month, the other 18 days of the month, right? And so that
exactly.
shows that there's a tighter correlation around those moon phases. Now, unlike your data, is actually we show a little bit of a tip to the new moon and actually pre new moon. And so that's interesting there. Now, keep in mind, we're not just measuring 30-inch fish. Of course, that I'd have to go back and take a look at just at the 59 that we had, maybe do the 59, and then I think the 93 that we had this year, and just do the dirty 30s. I'd be interested to see, because we have seen a little bit of variance with regards to that, right? In terms of like an actual 30-inch fish and then a 27-inch fish, you would still think they're pretty large and they kind of do similar things. They actually kind of don't. They're still adapting and changing. But all that being said, is there is that correlation between a new and a full. And so,
Yes.
like you, I work a full time job. I'm gonna fish 10 days a month. That's my goal for from now until April. And I used to fish 3-4 days a week, pretty much my whole life, and then obviously charter before that. But that's significantly less. And so now I'm trying to go down there and, kind of like stealing a phrase from Mike McBride, I'm going to go and try to catch them on purpose. I'm trying to put all those odds in my favor to go and actually target these fish on purpose and catch them on purpose.
Exactly.
Right. And so, but that one of the things that you mentioned, though, Doc, which we don't put a whole lot of, no pun intended, weight on, is actual weight. So you actually focus on collecting weight.
Well, yeah. And that's I guess that came up in the context of trying to analyze the Dirty 30 data. And since IGFA records um, are based on weight, obviously
Mm-hmm.
that's what I want to focus on. There can be, a large variability in the weight of a 30-inch fish. So I really didn't feel comfortable incorporating, all that all that dirty 30 data into the
Mm-hmm.
analysis that I did if I didn't know the actual weight. And yeah, and since I'm
Interesting.
specifically targeting 10-pound trout, I just feel like, I only want to use data that's associated with a 10-pound or greater fish, because that's the size of fish I need to catch the next world record. And like you were saying, it's not to say that a 7 or 9 pound 30-inch trout behaves a lot differently. But when I do analyze the fish from 8 to 9 pounds and I compare that to the fish over 10 pounds, I do see some subtle differences, just like you and I just talked about.
Interesting.
And then
So, I mean, yeah, and you've seen some of those differences in the study that you've done from double digit fish to, let's say, heavy 6 to low 8 pound fish.
yes, and most of the data though, again, I was focusing on 8 to 9 pound fish and then 10 pounds and over. So I
Hmm.
didn't really dip down
Okay.
into the
Yeah,
to
yeah,
the
yeah.
lower ones.
Okay, because yeah, I mean, we've actually had a 30-inch fish. I think it was like 6.5 pounds from Alabama submitted, and obviously super duper skinny fish. But we've also had, I think we had one from Alabama, also in Dauphin Island this spring, that was like 28 and a half. That was almost 9.5 pounds.
Right.
Just an
Yeah,
absolute
you just
beast.
never know.
So that's an interesting perspective for me, because now you're taking not only just the data, now you're categorizing it by weight, because that's what you need. And so
Right.
now you're seeing some variances there that you're trying to target and even hone in even more and kind of garner the, or just shape your craft even more to go and focus on that specific fish that's huge. And I mean, well, I used to fish redfish tournaments, and I've kind of used this analogy a lot. Maybe folks who have fished redfish tournaments, competitive redfish tournaments, is that there's a big difference between going to find a 26 3/4 inch redfish that's just under the slot of 27, that's 8 pounds, versus going to find another fish that same size that's like 6.5 or 6 3/4,
Correct.
right? These fish live in sometimes totally different areas, or there are certain parts of an estuary that are just have much more nutrient rich environment, and so I would envision kind of something similar, is that you're really trying to focus in more specifically on that. Is that somewhat
Sure. I
true?
mean, I'm trying to figure out what estuaries, most of the 10-pound and greater fish are coming from. Because their genetics are
Mhm.
probably going to be a little bit different, and again, it goes back to just trying to put the odds in my favor.
Yeah. Regarding your setup though, I mean, like what are you actually throwing? Like, what if you can, like, describe your setup in terms of your fly setup for folks that are actual fly fishermen out there that maybe listen to this podcast?
Sure. Well, my fly fishing setup really depends on the conditions, and I generally will use the lightest fly rod that I can, given the conditions. And the reason I do that is because a fly line is very heavy. I don't know, I don't know how many of your listeners are fly fishermen. Probably not a lot. But when that
Mhm.
line lands on the water, I mean, it can spook sea trout very easily. So the lighter, smaller line is going to make less of a disturbance when it hits the water. And if you're sight fishing, it shouldn't matter too much, because if you're putting the fly in the right place, the actual fly line is a good 11 feet or so behind it. But still, again, to improve my odds, if the wind is not blowing and it's super calm and I'm not having to throw big flies, then I use a 5 weight rod. And for just
Goodness.
about all other conditions, I use a 7 weight rod. And that probably sounds somewhat light for some of the fly fishermen out there. But again, the reason I'm using these lighter rods is to try and avoid spooking the fish as much. My favorite fly rod is a Sage X. I don't know if you want to know about brands or anything like
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. No, go in
But yeah,
specifics.
yeah,
Yeah,
I,
go
I
into
love the
detail.
Sage X rods. They're real accurate. Um, and then I use either a Sage 4580. It's a carbon fiber reel because it's really light with a really big diameter, so you can uh, you know collect a lot of line.
Mhm.
And I use a Nautilus X XL Max reel on some of my rods, and again, it's a really nice lightweight reel with a really good drag. The fly lines that I'm using are, it just depend. If I'm sight fishing, then I'm going to use a gray colored airflow floating line. Um,
Mhm.
and typically I'll have a 10 to 11 foot leader on that. And the reason I use, a line that I can see a little bit better is it just makes it easier to make a more accurate cast. But with the gray, I don't think it contrasts as much with the sky, and again, less likely to spook the fish. But then I also blind cast sometimes, and for blind casting, I use a clear Cortland floating line, and I typically use it like an 11 or 13 foot leader. I can get away with a longer leader blind casting because I'm not necessarily, always casting or having to cast into the wind to get to a fish when I'm sight casting. Um,
Mhm.
and then
Now, oh, go ahead, Doc.
no,
I'm
it's
sorry.
fine.
Sorry to
Now, I was
interrupt
just gonna
you.
say, um, the tippet size would be whatever strength that I'm trying to get a world record in, And on the end of that tippet, I typically use a 15-pound fluorocarbon bite tippet.
I
And
see.
all that's tied
No.
to IGFA specifications. For fly fishing, you have to have at least 15 inches of your class tippet. It can be longer, but it has to be at least 15 inches. And then you can either tie your fly onto the end of that, or you can use what is called a bite tippet, and they will allow you to use a 12-inch bite tippet. So it has to be a maximum of 12 inches, and that can be of basically any strength that you want.
Gotcha. Are you always fishing for a world record? Like every time I know you fish out of Hell's Bay. Are you every time you push that Hell's Bay off the skids? I mean, are you always looking for a world class fish?
Well, pretty much when I'm by myself now, I did a lot of fishing this summer with my daughters because we were in
Mm-hmm.
the CCA
And
start.
I was about to say they achieved something spectacular, right?
Yeah, one of them did. Valerie actually, these are my twins. They're my youngest girls, but Valerie, who's one of the twins, she actually won the top prize, which was a $25,000 scholarship. So
That's awesome.
just amazing.
I saw her holding up that check on Facebook. I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing. Yeah. I'm not
Yeah.
shocked, but that's amazing. That's awesome that you get a chance to do that still with your girls.
It really is. It's just incredible. I mean, we made so many great memories, and it's just been great.
Hey, so for all the conventional tackle guys out there, what are some of the conventional tackle or some of the conventional lures that you throw, or what's kind of your conventional setup?
Well, I just typically use a 7.5 foot light action spinning rod.
Okay.
I use the 3000 Shimano Stratic CI4 reels. I put 10-pound Power Pro, that
Mm-hmm.
Super 8 slick line, and then generally tie about a 9 foot section of 15-pound fluorocarbon onto that. Usually using an FG knot, really always using an FG knot because it slides through the
Interesting.
guides really well,
Okay.
and it allows me to have that longer leader, which I don't know if it's important, but again, I'll say it a million times. I think it does put the odds a little bit more in your favor by having that long leader and maybe
Mm-hmm.
not putting fish off. Um,
What are some of your favorite conventional lures to throw?
well, I love top waters. I mean, most of the time, if I'm just out there messing around or trying to locate fish, I'll be using some form of a topwater lure.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I like the super spooks, both the regular size super spook and
Mm-hmm.
super spook junior. Um, I don't fly. I mean, I don't conventional fish a lot, but I like the
Yeah.
7M mirror lure, and I like the Miradines, the larger
Yeah.
ones and the
Seven.
smaller ones.
Okay.
And those are probably my favorite lures. You know, s-
Did you throw a lot of Corky Fat Boys when you
oh
lived here in
geez.
Texas?
Yeah. The problem is
Yeah.
the problem here in Florida, is that it never gets cold enough, in my opinion, to even throw those. I always felt that the Corky and the Fat Boy, less so the Fat Boy, was more of a cold water lure. And I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I won so many. Well, I won, I think, most of my tournaments on a Corky of some sort. Either the sinking or the Fat Boy.
Floater. Yeah.
Yeah. But for whatever reason, it just seems like in Florida, um, the fish are more attracted to, something that's moving a little quicker with a lot more flash, like some of the hard
Mm-hmm.
baits, unless it gets cold. I mean, if it gets really cold here, it works, just amazingly well, just like it did in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but in the spring here when it warms up, it just doesn't seem like they respond as well to corkies.
Yeah. I got on a pretty good run there before I left and moved back to Texas. there in the northern reaches of Banana River. Actually, it got pretty cold that last winter that we had in 18. It actually got really cold, and so right before it got just bitterly cold, actually, it got on a really, really good fat boy bite for about almost 3 weeks. And I just posted a picture about it on the page to the day. It was actually 1 November, and it was pretty daggum chilly right there like I said, in the northern Banana River. And I caught a really, really good fish, about 27.
Wow.
Uh, yeah, it
Yeah,
was a really
that's
great fish. It thumped the big clear with the '07, which is that clear with that chartreuse tail. Fat boy, man, she just smoked it. But actually, it was that whole. It was like 3 weeks, and what I found is actually those fish were up on those flats, got really cold, and I think they were eating needlefish.
mm,
I mean, you could see them kind of cruising, and they were up in the grass. They were crashing needlefish, and I think anything that looked clear and had some sort of like little flash, but some sort of iridescence, they just demolished.
wow.
They wouldn't hit anything super dark, or it was pretty interesting.
Yeah, and again, do you remember what the temperature was?
Yeah, it was definitely in the low
Right.
50s. It was definitely, the water temp was easily probably in the low 60s, which is pretty cold for South Florida, especially that early in the year. And I remember getting a couple of really cold, hard fronts that really pushed through, and they were kind of unrelenting. And it got the water temps in the upper 50s for a while, because I know we had a lot of snook die off in the northern Banana River. So I know it definitely got cold there for a while, but it was an awesome bite for a while. Anyway,
Yeah, again, if it does get down below 65, then I would definitely be using them.
yeah, but that's awesome. So Doc, we're close to an hour, and I hate to do this, but I'd love to have you on again, if that would be amazing if you're okay with
Sure.
that. But yeah, awesome. But before we kind of, I guess, end the show, I asked some questions, which kind of leads to generally more discussion. And so the first question I want to ask you, I think you kind of alluded to it. Do you think Craig Carson's record 17-7, you think it'll ever be broken?
That's a tricky question, and I I think it will. I do think it will, but this is the thing. I do not think that it'll be broken by a native spotted sea trout in any of our estuaries. Unless the biologists can figure out what's causing the demise of Florida's east coast and try to find some way
Hmm.
to correct it, I just don't think we'll ever see a trout that big again. Um, I think Florida's problem is we just have too many people that are moving into this state, and it's just really taxing our natural resources. I do have a little more optimism for Texas because I don't think they're experiencing quite the type of population growth that we're seeing here in Florida. But I still think it's a long shot. And the reason I said yes though is because I've thought about this before. Um, I think that we may be forced to start genetically engineering sea trout to replace these native populations that just won't be able to be sustained because of the poor water quality issues. And there are already several entities that are genetically engineering other fish like salmon and tilapia, and they're engineering them to grow faster and be more resistant to disease and things like that. So I hope that never comes about. um, but who knows what's going to happen in the future. If I pray that we never have to resort to that, but I don't know, I could just see that happening. But as far as our native fish, if nothing changes, I think it'd be very difficult to break.
I have never thought of that, about the genetically engineered, like,
Yeah, I mean it's crazy.
I
It
have
is
never
crazy
thought of
what
that.
people are doing, with crops, everything. All this genetically modified stuff. It's just unreal.
If there's a reason for a pause right now in this podcast, is because, like, I'm physically trying to, like, wrap my brain around, like, what was just said, because that is something I have given no thought to whatsoever. and I've seen it firsthand, especially in the Florida areas, especially in terms of water quality. Oh my gosh. And so, wow, I don't even know how to respond to that. So I'm going to move
It's
on
fine.
if just because I've never maybe given it that amount of thought. I always just say yes because I'm always inspired. Maybe perpetual optimism gives me that,
Well, I
but
hope it happens. I really
I'm
do,
always
and
in.
I hope there's big fish
Yeah,
swimming around out there, like the beast of legend. But
yeah.
I don't know. I guess that's kind of proof that there maybe there are some in South Texas. And again, I do have a lot more optimism for the Texas coast, and it probably won't be long before I'm having to go over there and spend a lot more time fishing.
If I heard you right, do you think, and you might make a lot of people mad here, but do you think Texas would actually produce the next world record?
um, I mean, potentially, yes, and there are some areas like in Northeast Florida where I think that a potential world record could come out of. But yeah, right now, I mean, I would place my money on Texas over Florida. That's for sure.
Interesting. Interesting. Between the genetically engineering fish and now I'm fishing in a potential world record place, you're about to get a lot of people inspired here in a coast of Texas to start donning some waders and wading flats. That's awesome. All right, so this may be somewhat rhetorical, but what is your favorite estuary or complex to target big fish or area, state, whatever?
Yeah, well, again, used to be that by far my favorite estuary was the Indian River Lagoon, and particularly the
Hmm.
southern Indian River Lagoon. And
The Fort Pierce area.
exactly, all the
Uh,
way from Sebastian, Vero Beach, Fort Pierce.
mhm,
I mean, Stewart's a wreck now, so that's kind of out. But back in the day when they weren't having so many discharges, the Stewart area was just phenomenal, and
mhm.
that was by far my favorite area to fish was down in that region. Um, you know, I was fishing the Vero Beach area recently, and over the summer, the seagrass had actually started growing back really, really well. I mean, the water cleared
Interesting.
up. The water cleared up in Sebastian, Vero, and the seagrass was growing really well. I mean, it looked amazing, and I heard that in Sebastian, all that good growth, I think we had a bunch of rain and all that grass died off again. Um,
Hmm.
and then in Vero, I haven't really been back to Vero since the last day that my daughter and I fished in that tournament, and that was just prior to the last hurricane that we had that was coming through.
Yeah.
Um, but when we went on that trip, it looked like the same exact thing was happening. It looked like the grass was dying off again, and the water
Hmm.
clarity had really gone really bad. Um,
Yeah.
so again, I still would prefer to fish in that area. It has a history of just having a lot of really, really big fish. A lot of the line class world records that still exist, they came from Fort Pierce or around that area. So I think it has the potential to produce some really large fish, and it is my favorite fishery, but right now it's just not happening.
Hmm. Hmm. That's interesting. Like, what about like the Baffin complex or the Galveston complex? From what I mean, obviously you've fished that a lot. You've had a lot of success in some of those areas.
Yeah, I mean, I like Baffin. I really like the lower Laguna Madre, and
The Mansfield area. Yeah.
yep, um, and even all the way down to like Port Isabel. I mean
Hmm.
that whole area. I think that's the area where I think a potential world record could come from. It's funny because my buddy John, the guy I was talking to you about earlier, John Gill, I mean, we were just
Hmm.
talking the other day about how, in Matagorda right now, I mean, they're catching a lot of really healthy fish, but he and I both agree that you usually don't catch those really big ones there. 10, 11, 12 pounders. I mean, well, you don't catch those a lot of places anyway, but I
Yeah.
feel like you have a much better shot. I mean, down south, I mean, John's caught like 14 fish over 10 pounds. Um,
Goodness
yeah,
gracious.
so uh,
That's so crazy.
it is. But and most of those fish came from Texas and South Texas. Now he caught how many?
Hmm.
I think he only caught one 10-pounder in Florida with me. But so almost all those fish came from Texas.
Yeah. In L. Scott Murray's book, for folks who haven't read it, I don't have the actual book here in where I'm at my desk, but it's world class trophy trout for tomorrow, or Texas trophy trout for tomorrow. I'll have to post it maybe in the show notes, but L. Scott Murray does an amazing job. And he really talks about a myriad of different kind of Texas legends. They tell their story about maybe an experience of kind of their biggest fish that they caught. And so them telling the story is just so
It
captivating.
is.
And one of the stories that sticks out to me is actually really, really awesome was obviously when Jim Wallace broke his state record from the eyes, I think, of Mike Blackwood. And in that book, he talks about that day, them going out there, and when Jim Wallace, I think, broke the state record with a 13.5 pound fish, that day there were like two fish also registered at Roy's Bait and Tackle that were like over 12 pounds with a couple other. I think he said something like there were almost a dozen fish over the 10-pound mark that were caught that
It,
day. It was
it
just
is.
absolutely
It's
ridiculous,
unreal.
to even think that that's even possible.
It really is.
So anyway, it's just awesome to kind of, and the cool thing about it is actually we'll talk to Mike Blackwood here in this podcast at some point and kind of get that story firsthand from the man who saw
Oh,
it.
that'll be a good
So that's
one.
that's gonna be cool. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
No, that book
So
is really really good. So that would be cool if you could post that for the listeners. I'd highly
yeah,
highly recommend it if you're at all interested in big trout.
yeah, he's a follower of the page too, Mr. Murray, and I've also talked to him when I got a chance to go down to Corpus Christi and talk to the Ananias Fishing Club. David Bjork invited me out there. He's a good friend here. I think he's the actual president now. And so I got a chance to meet a number of those folks, to include Mike and Scott. And another humbling experience to get up there and talk about kind of what we're doing in Speckled Truth to this established group of people that they're probably like, young man, get the hell out of here. But
No, not at all.
like you, no, exactly. Like you, sir, they were incredibly excited, and that's the humbling component. Is they were incredibly humble people just to invite me there, listen to kind of what we had to say. It was so awesome, and just be a part of it and be a part of what we're doing and kind of telling their story, because your story, you being on this podcast, a lot of people may not know Doc Jay Wright. I want people to know Doc Jay Wright because that's an important thing for folks in our community to know, is who has done, like, we're talking targeting world-class fish with a dude who's done it not once, twice, but 3 times, and who does it perpetually and very well. And so what a resource, sir, to have you here talking to people. That is, but we don't, we don't know that. And that's a sad reality, is because we've kind of gotten away from the history about it, right? We've gotten away from understanding what those who've kind of paved the way for us to what we know now. I'm going to say it now. The Mirror Lord Double D, and you've heard me talk about it, talking to Lowell Odom. The reason there's red hooks on those Mirror Lord Double Ds is because of you, because of Doc Jay Wright, back when you were down here. And so go ahead and tell people kind of what, why you fish with those red hooks.
Well, there was a couple reasons that I started fishing with those red hooks, and The one reason was they are a stronger wire hook. So I had a lot of problems with my hooks opening up, um,
Hmm.
and so that was one reason. They're like a 4x treble hook. They're also very
Yeah.
sharp, and then the other reason was those hooks don't tend to rust. I mean, when I started using them, I realized, wow, man, these don't rust as much as some of these other hooks do. And so that's the reason that I originally started using them.
Yeah. And so I've found, and I'm looking at a few here hanging up on my rod here in my room, is that they've been so beat to hell. Honestly, the hooks turn white,
Yeah,
so they go from almost like a red
that red
flash
wears
to
off exactly.
to a white, right? And then, but there's not a lick of rust anywhere near them. And then not only that, especially on the with those good quality components and split rings, and so that's huge, right? Targeting big fish. I love, I love the round bend versus the J hook,
Exactly. Yeah.
particularly with that style of hook, and that just obviously gives it a much wider gap.
Exactly.
But I just want folks to know that the reason you're fishing these things, and it's something small, but it's still there's contributions that have been made by you guys and by Jay, right, or Jay Watkins, and all those who've walked before us into our fishery that we need to know. Anyway,
I
all right.
appreciate
So
that.
I want to ask this last. I want to ask this last question, Doc. Tell us about the one that got away.
Oh, geez. Well, what's funny is I can pretty honestly say that I've never had what I felt was a giant trout get away.
That's
Yeah, no,
amazing.
I mean, and sometimes maybe I mean, I assumed it was a redfish and maybe it wasn't, but there was nothing that I can, that would indicate to me that I've ever lost what I thought was a really, really big fish. Now I have seen some monsters. I've seen fish in Fort Pierce that would definitely either equal or probably beat the all tackle world record of 17 pounds. I mean, just enormous. So I can't say that I've ever had one of those even come close to eating my fly or eating a lure, but they were there. They were definitely there. As little as probably 5 years ago, I've seen some fish that I guarantee you were 15 pounds. In fact, if they were deep, you always couldn't tell, whether it was a snook or a trout. But there were areas, that I fished that were fairly shallow, and those fish would come up there, and they were just enormous, uh, just crazy.
To think that as little as 5 years ago, that I mean, best guesstimation. I mean, like you said, obviously all tackle world record 39. Oh, is it 39.5 inch fish? I think the girth was like what something astronomical. It was like
It was
22
19
inches or
inches.
not. Yeah, okay. I know it was something ridiculous,
Yeah,
but well, you think it was a 40-inch trout or
yeah. I've seen two that I think were 40 inches in my lifetime. That
unreal?
that very well could have been 40 inches in Fort Pierce. I mean, just enormous. But again, those fish have just totally disappeared, and it is just so disappointing. But I sure hope we can figure something out and you know get get figure out why the seagrass is dying off. I think that's the main
Yeah,
issue, and
yeah.
try to reverse that.
Oh my God, I'm inspired to go and target big fish. This is my time of year. I don't fish all summer because I want to. This is it. I put kind of all my eggs in one basket to fish November, or really October through April, because I love the conditions. I love the weather. I love how things kind of set up in terms of targeting some bigger fish here. And this is this is inspiring for me because to listen to you kind of talk about your pursuit, it reestablishes, and not only that, but like from some of the data we're collecting and kind of our thought process behind collecting some of the data, that we're kind of on the right track. Again, all that's inspiring to me to go. hey man, let's go, right? Let's get after this and go catch, or at least challenge ourselves to go catch something as big as we can, because I think that goes back to maybe one of your original points, is that I just want to go and catch the biggest thing that I can, right? The
Yeah.
biggest trout that I can. And so whether that's at that particular day, if it's a 7-pound fish because we have crummy conditions or something's not setting up, I want to go and be consistent, in terms of catching whatever is presented to me that's the biggest of that day. But
Yeah.
I'm inspired, Doc.
Oh,
I'm
good.
inspired.
Hey,
Yeah. So, hey, I always do it here in the show, and that's asking kind of something that you want to leave in terms kind of your closing thoughts, or I say parting shot, but Mike sounds like I'm mortally wounding somebody. so I'll ask you to say really any of your closing remarks, sir.
well, I would just encourage anglers to try to embrace conservation and try to get involved in whatever conservation organization that you believe in. Fishing has just really been a blessing for me, and it's allowed me to share some wonderful memories with my family and my friends. And I'm just hoping that my daughters will get to enjoy fishing with their families, and I would love to someday have a grandson who enjoyed spending time fishing with me, just like the bond that I had with my grandfather. And unfortunately, none of that will be possible if we just can't take care of our environment and our estuaries.
I have nothing to add. That is amazing. Doc, thank you. Thank you
Oh man,
for
thank,
being on the show tonight.
thank you so much. Thanks for spreading the speckled truth.
Yeah,
I just
man.
think what you're doing is amazing, and I really appreciate you promoting conservation.
You got it, Doc. You got it. Because I'm like you. I got 3 boys. At some point, one, I love cherishing the moments I have with them, and I still got 2 more to get to a set of waders wait alongside me. One's 7, the other one's 3. But my 10-year-old, he got to experience that for the first time this year. Although he's fished a lot with me, but it's all about kind of sharing that passion and sharing our passion with them, and bringing it on to that next generation. So
Exactly.
I that is my main driver. That's, I think, for the 4 guys that are with Speckled Truth, that's kind of what we see. That's the investment we make in our time and our money to talk to people and get people to understand that they have a responsibility to a resource. And so thank
Yes.
you for saying that. I appreciate it, especially somebody who has such leverage, I guess, in so many accolades, I guess, in the industry. So,
Oh,
but
no problem.
yeah, thanks, Doc. I really appreciate it. I'm going to take you up on your offer to be back on another episode, maybe season 2, right? I mean, this is season 1, and so we got a lot of people to talk to across the coast, from the
Well,
Carolinas all the way down back here to Texas, like Blackwood and
yeah,
Mr. Blackwood. And so
and that's
we want them to tell our story. Go ahead, sir.
well. I was just gonna say. I mean, I think that's in a tribute to you. That we really do all respect you a lot, and I think a lot more than you think we might. I just think what you're doing is really great.
Again, none of this happens without the support of our sponsors from Mirror Lure, Texas Custom Lures, and the original Custom Corky. Without your support, none of this is possible. So thanks again to them. We hope to see you next time here at the Speckled Truth podcast. And we always want to leave you with this one tidbit. Always remember to take what you need and release the rest. God bless.